You're listening to The Creative Imposter. I'm your producer and host, Andrea Klunder. And today, I have a pop quiz for you. Not what you were expecting, was it? Okay, here we go. What do the following 3 things have in common? Number 1, a series of free concerts performed outdoors in the San Francisco Bay Area and online designed to spread joy and connection during a global pandemic. Number 2, an oratorio commission by composer Wang Ro, world premiere, and subsequent podcast inspired by poetry written by Chinese detainees on Angel Island attempting to immigrate into the United States in the early 1900s. And number 3, a 5-day rafting trip along the Yampa River in the state of Utah, where you begin and end your day with a live string quartet concert performed in the woods at your campsite. Well, if you looked at the title of this episode, you've already guessed it. It's the Sol Quartet, currently composed of Charlton Lee on viola, Hyeyung Yoon, and Ben Creeth on violin, and Kathryn Bates on cello. And if you've been paying attention for more than one episode, you may know that I have been having the pleasure to collaborate with Del Sol on the very first season of their podcast, Sounds Current, which was a 2024 official selection at the Tribeca Audio Storytelling Festival and won a Gold Signal Award for artists and designers shaping culture. Music to my ears. But awards and silly puns aside, let me tell you what this collaboration has been like for me. Okay, have you ever had an experience of working on a project with someone who is at the top of their game? And by working together, it pushes you artistically, in a good way, to be and do more than you have in the past. A project that stretches your skills in a way that at times is uncomfortable and exhausting. But in the end, you see, or in this case, hear what you've created and say, wow, that really is good. And then suddenly you find yourself in new rooms having new conversations with new people about increasingly more inspiring topics. Well, if you haven't had that experience yet, go ahead and live vicariously through me for the next hour, and maybe you'll get a taste of what I mean. This episode, however, is not just about creating a podcast, though we do talk a little bit about Sounds Current toward the end. It's about the joys and tension of being part of a group of artists rather than a solo creator, pushing yourself to do something new in order to move society forward, and making art that means something valuable even when and especially if it doesn't make sense economically. Oh, and you will hear us mention briefly the Yampa River trip and the Pandemic Joy Project from our pop quiz, though we don't go into a ton of detail about either of those. If you want to learn more, please visit delsolquartet.com, which is linked in the show notes for you, as well as Sounds Current, our award-winning podcast collaboration, which I would love for you to hear if you haven't already, and share with those who you know who may also be moved by it. Season 1 was about Angel Island's history, the commission and premiere of the oratorio, and a reflection of the ongoing immigration story. Season 2 is in the works about the Yampa River, water conservation, and changing ecosystems, yes, and what music has to do with all of that. If this topic excites you and you'd like to learn more, reach out. My email, andrea@thecreativeimposter.com, is also in this episode's description in your app. Looking back at my notes for this intro, I think I've made the interview and the Sol Quartet sound very serious. And while, of course, they are very serious musicians, they also each individually have a delightful sense of humor. And collectively, we have a lot of fun. So take a breath, get comfy, And please enjoy my conversation with Charlton, Kathryn, Hyeyung, and Ben. The first thing I would love to do is just dive in and have each of you introduce your name and what instrument you play. And if you want to give one fun fact about yourself, feel free.
I'll go first. Hi, I'm Hyeyung Yoon, and I play the violin. And one fun fact, I just made acorn jello.
Oh.
It's very good. It's very delicious. It's a Korean dish. Yeah.
Wow. Did you gather the acorns?
I did not.
Steal it from the squirrels.
I did not. But thanks for asking.
I'm Ben Creeth, and I play violin in Sol Quartet. And I've never made acorn jelly. But I sometimes make pomegranate jelly, and I might do that next month if I get organized.
I actually really want to know more about that.
It's really good.
This has now turned into a food podcast. All of a sudden, that's fine.
That's pretty normal.
It's par for the course with Del Sol, yeah.
I'm Charlton Lee. I am the violist with the Del Sol Quartet.
A fun fact.
Fun fact. Oh, God. Fun?
The fun fact is Charlton is not fun. He is the most boring member of the Del Sol Quartet.
A really big question mark after that. Fun?
There's too many things. I'm not quite sure what direction to go.
Food. Stick with food.
Oh, okay.
We're on a
food.
theme.
How old is the oldest sauce in your refrigerator?
That is, okay. The oldest sauce, it's not in my fridge. It's in my freezer, which I take out to braise certain meats, and it just gets richer and richer with each.
But it's frozen.
Yeah.
How does it get richer and richer?
No.
You defrost it.
I defrost it, and I cook more
Use it.
things in it, and then I strain it, and I freeze it again.
Oh, you strain
So
it.
each
probably-
time it gets a little bit more
Oh,
flaky.
I see.
20
Interesting.
years old?
I don't know about that, but
10, 15?
easily 10,
Wow.
15.
I'm Kathryn Bates. I'm cellist of Del Sol. I'm the longest surviving cellist of Del Sol.
It makes it sound like they all passed away in an untimely...
It does.
It's sort of like Spinal Tap.
I was the drummer in Spinal Tap for a while, meaning I have the longest tenure in Del Sol, but I roast coffee sometimes in my spare time. It's so much better. So that's my fun food fact.
Excellent. And where am I catching you all? Is today a rehearsal day? Is what's happening today?
Today is a rehearsal day.
Okay. So I'm going to jump straight into sort of a possibly deep question. You are all multi-talented, multi-passionate individuals, as we heard from all of these food adventures. Amidst all of the different things that you could be doing, you also have children and also have many other responsibilities in your life. All of the different things you could be spending your time doing, all the different career paths you could be on at this moment. What keeps you creating music?
No one speaks.
I like it.
I would say it encapsulates a little bit of everything that I'm passionate about. There's a sense of teamwork, but also a sense of exploration. I think from my ancient science background to even just my experiments in cooking, experimentation is a big part of my life, and in music, because we're always working with new music, with newly composed music, and with living composers. There's always this sense that each new piece we're diving into another language, and we have to dig in and figure out what the vocabulary is and what the grammar is, and how do we put this together in a way that's going to reach people and touch people. Also, there's the physicality of it. I've always, enjoyed sports and martial arts in particular. And I think the idea of the awareness of the body and how it works and functions and how to optimize your movements is also another aspect. And finally, of course, just like the engagement with audience, being able to connect with people on an emotional level, on a spiritual level, on an artistic level, and in so many different ways, on a cultural level. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, we get to make magic on a daily basis, and we get to create magic in people's lives and actually say, like, we've changed lives. We can actually say that, which is incredible. And it feeds us, or it feeds me, certainly, and then it feeds other people. So for me, it never gets dull. And as Charlton was saying, there's a curiosity and exploration in our work that it keeps it interesting. Like every day is different. Every day we get to push ourselves to learn something new, to go deeper. And that's an incredible way to spend your life. And then at the same time, we get to do something that really moves people and can actually move society. And that's unbelievable. I also think that in a world that often wants to put everything into binary, into black and white or purple and fluorescent orange, that we get to live in between. We get to live in the ambiguity. We get to be in spaces between the binary, and we get to show people that there's a different path. And I think, that keeps me going.
And also, like, there's a ritualistic aspect of it, of playing the instrument, also rehearsing. And because, it just, as Charlton said, like, it does use your physical body. So you need to keep it going. You need to keep the physical body going, your mind going. So there's this, sense of like coming back to the instrument again and again, and then coming back to rehearsal together. But I think what's really amazing about string quartet playing specifically is that we get to do this ritual with a community of people, with like 3 other people, but then also have it go out to the world, to others to share music with. And I think, I think it's really special that way. I really love it. Yeah. And also like music, just to have that practice that you can like smile at it and to like feel it and to like enjoy it. I love music. It's like, it's so great. So great. I love music more now than I did like when I first decided to like go, play the violin, I love it more now. Yeah. Which is pretty amazing. I'm like very happy to say that. Yeah.
We get to alter like sound waves in the room. It's pretty awesome.
Right. Yeah.
A few years ago, we got to share a university visit seminar with the composer Frederick Rzewski. And the answer he gave just sticks with me. It's so challenging and obnoxious and probably true. His answer is because it feels good.
Yeah. Totally.
And,
totally.
It's not something that when people are paying you a bunch of money to go and talk to students, it's like, well, how many words is that? Because it's like 4 words. But, we all started making music when we were, like 1 year old. And so all the ideas, it's all true. Everything everyone said is true. But I think it kind of stems from that because we would have stopped otherwise.
Yeah.
And certainly you're all talking of sort of the magic making and the dynamic and how cool it is to be part of this group and the teamwork and how it feels good. But certainly being an artist as part of a group, most of the interviews that I've done on this podcast are with individual creators, or at most like a team of 2. And in a dynamic of 4, we don't know what happened to those previous cellists that did not survive. But in a group of 4, there must be some challenges in the way that you function as a group. And I'm kind of curious, what are the hard parts?
The mathematical, when you have one person or you have 2 people and the types of decision making and the types of conflicts, it's very easily resolved. When you have 4, you have exponential more types of relationships. You have the relationship of every individual to every other individual. You have relationships of the pairs to the pairs and the 3s to the 1s. And it's a family, right? And we have to learn how to deal with conflict. And we're dealing with conflict about things that are most vulnerable and most close to your heart, and oftentimes not very articulable. That, right? And so every day you risk yourself, putting yourself out there, going for what you want, for why you're in this world. And it's hard not to feel constantly disappointed in yourself and in each other. And you have to create. Well, we have to work to know how to talk about hard things, come to a sort of established shared values and shared goals. Because if those aren't articulated, then, I might be pulling in this way and you might be pulling that way. And then we're just at odds with one another and we're pissed off at one another and we're tired and we're stressed because we're on the road and we're traveling together and you were late and I was early and, and there's so much wrapped up. And so that we have to come to a way to work together through conflict to achieve greater goals, and yet honor each other's unique strengths and honor each other's unique sort of vantage point. So it's incredibly complex, and it's definitely a daily practice. And there's a reason why many, many string quartets absolutely hate each other and fight like cats and dogs and sometimes break up. And it's something that we work every day on, is to show each other that sort of love and respect and to make sure we're pointed in the same direction.
It's not just string quartets. I think bands of any kind. There was like a recent fight on stage for like a Jane's Addiction concert or something like that?
Jane's Addiction is still
going? No, they just ended the tour because of this fight.
Oh my God. I just lost my train of thought.
Sorry. My bad.
The challenges of functioning as a group, as a quartet.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that we're all veteran chamber musicians. Like, we've worked in, a quartet for many, number of years. And I'm the newest member of the Sol Quartet, and I joined like a year and a half ago. But before then, I was in a quartet for a long time. So I think it's a skill that you just develop over time too. Hopefully, if you want to try to make it work. And some people just are not interested in it and they decide to leave. But like, I think it's like anything, like practicing your scales. Like, it's like, you like work on communication, like how to communicate with each other. So you're using the right words so that you are able to respect the other people's opinions and use words in such a way and know when to shut up, actually, to know when to like not talk. I mean, for me, I think the most important lesson in being in quartet for a long time and in terms of communication is or like a philosophy of thinking about music making within a small group is that like there's no right or wrong. Like, as soon as somebody says this is the right way and this is the wrong way, I feel like there is no, for me, interest in that dialogue. Like, that's kind of a boring kind of situation for me personally, because I think that when you look at it in a binary way, I think it limits the options and limits the creativity. When somebody in the quartet has like an idea that I'm like or like disagree with, right? I try to be good about this. I think we all try to be, I usually try to just not speak for, an extended moment of time so that I can actually hear the other person rather than just react right away, which is a practice. Like, you have to practice that.
Oh, you're good at that.
You're very good at that.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You are. I'm not so good at it. I'm working on it.
That makes sense to me, too. I mean, even to expand out from right and wrong, it almost doesn't matter what the idea is, as long as everyone feels connected to it and comfortable doing it. Because, then we all have something very positive to share as a group. And it doesn't matter how good the idea is if we can't, feel a part of it.
And artistically, when we're rehearsing, we don't particularly have a leader. And so it's a little bit like playing a Ouija board. Everybody has their hand on it. And if you can let go enough, then the spirits will take over and you'll come up with like really inspirational things without any person trying to guide it. That's sort of the ideal.
In execution.
Maybe that's something that we do get with experience, is like, it's hard to look back and be like, oh, that was a great concert, except, like this person played really poorly because they were uncomfortable. It's just like, there is no such concert, right? It's like everyone needs to be comfortable and involved.
And how do you, speaking of that, how do you sort of individually or as a group, how do you measure success? Like, how do you determine like that was a great concert or this was a meaningful project, or what is it that you are looking for in terms of those experiences that feel really good or feel really successful? What is that measured by? Kathryn's laughing.
Can you sit in our planning meetings?
Yeah.
No, I was like, I can tell you.
Well, you're the grant writer.
I'm the grant writer, so I always have to talk about how do we measure success. No, I think we have personal things that, like, feeling good after you play, feeling like, hey, that went well, or that was like close to the vision of the stuff that we've been rehearsing. I think we all probably have some level of that. And I do think that the way that the audience reacts is important. So when we're disconnected from the audience, like we have 3,000 people who are listening to us, it's harder to gauge that. But when we have more intimate numbers, we're able to get more immediate feedback. And for example, recently at a concert, a person came up to me and said, that concert was so inspiring. I have a violin in my closet. I haven't touched it in 30 years. I want to go home and practice. And that is a comment that I have never gotten before. And I was like, whoa, like what did we do? And how did we create that environment that not only gave the person something wonderful with the music, but actually was so inspiring that they wanted to go and play music? And that to me was like, wow, we've taken this to a new level. And what was crazy about that concert was I heard from a second person the exact same thing. So in an intimate concert of like 40, 50 people, 2 people wanted to go home and pick up instruments they haven't touched in, 30 years. And so I think that audience feedback and the way that people feel, and then, I think we then see that reflected in the numbers of people who are engaged with the quartet, the number of people who are excited to come to concerts, the comments that we get after the concerts, the way that we're able to sell out venues. It's not that grant funding or more concerts or bigger audiences are always a direct line of success, but it is a form of feedback about whether or not what we're doing is working, because we can feel good and it cannot work for the audience. And I think what I know about Del Sol is that we want both. Like some people don't need both. Some people are happy playing their instrument and feeling good in their basement. More people who want to feel good on stage and also want to impact the environment around us. So measuring that kind of impact, I think, is important to us.
So you're talking about impacting the environment around you. And I think when I started working with you, or even before I started working with you, you were introduced to me through our mutual acquaintance, which sounds weird because she is so much more than an acquaintance, Andrea Fellows-Feinberg. And when she just told me about you, she's like, I think we need to connect you. Take a look at their website. They do this, 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 and this. I almost couldn't process, like in the couple minutes that she was talking to me about Del Sol and what you do, I almost couldn't process. She said something about concerts. She said something about immigration and cultural relevance. She said something about playing music on the banks of a river and something about technology and something about education. I was like, whoa, like what is this organization? Because I don't necessarily know what the normal functioning of a quote normal string quartet is. Like if you say, oh, this is what a string quartet does. She said 5 or 6 things that would not be what I necessarily think that a string quartet does. And so when we're looking at what it is that you set out to do as part of your mission, like, yes, it is playing chamber music. It is working with living composers. But what are the broader implications of those impacts and ripples in the environment? How do you sort of describe what it is that you do that is kind of unique, I think?
I think it's a bit of a reflection of our personalities. I'll speak for myself, but I think as a performing artist, there is this confluence of, there's the discipline, as Hyeyung was talking about, the discipline of coming together, this ritual almost of coming together, rehearsing and building our craft together, but at the same time, trying to come up with ways that we can make an artistic impression on people and to somehow get them out of their normal state of being or the normal way of thinking to consider alternate ideas and concepts or realities. And I think the combination of all these different things and our interests in exploring and doing this and that, and what does it mean to be an artist? What does it mean to be a musician? What does it mean to engage with our audiences in a modern context? Because we play music that is written by living composers, many times we are the first people to play these pieces. And so, how are we going to bring them to life in a way that is meaningful to our audiences?
To go further, right? I think a lot of the work we've been doing is about, to use one of our taglines, like live music can and should happen anywhere. And this idea that we're taking music and we're bringing it to people. We're not expecting them to necessarily show up to us. And that in that process, we are often changing the place we're in with the music and that the place changes the music. And it becomes this living experience, right? It's all about the freshness, the newness of the music, but it's about conversation. It's about connecting people to each other, connecting people to new ideas, setting them on new paths of thinking or new paths to explore, whether that's the history of Angel Island or crazy just intonation tuning systems or new intellectual thoughts or new musical thoughts or new cultural thoughts or new cultural people or, new spaces that they've never been to. And so it's about connection and movement. And I think, our annual river trip is just like in some sense, the epitome of everything that we do about the conversation with the space and the conversation with the people and the way that we can create music and then also create movement in people's lives.
I've been thinking a lot about the idea that, at least to some extent, music happens in the listener. Of course, we all experience, everything differently, but say a political speech or something is fairly directed in your experience. Music is quite open. So I think that something we all enjoy is setting up situations where people can have their experience because of the music, because of the place, because of these combinations. That when we create music on a riverbank, people have time, they have a intellectual and just sort of sensory openness that allows them to experience something new, and everyone experiences, something different. If we play music by immigrant composers in a detention center, they have an experience that, that to some extent we've set something up that allows them to have an experience, but there's also a lot of openness. It doesn't feel like we're confining people, that we're telling them what to think. And I think we all feel very comfortable with that role. So I do think that's sort of a common thread, because music can be used to prompt people's experiences. I mean, a military march can, send people off to, burn down the neighboring castle. Or, why is music used in church? It allows people to have different types of experiences. So it feels both powerful and also kind of non-bullying, because we can let people, experience whatever is in them on that day.
Going back to your previous question about success, I don't think, for me, I've never, no matter how well we played in a studio or in rehearsal, never considered that a so-called successful performance or experience. I mean, it's okay. It's, you feel good about it, but it's not, if there's no audience,
right,
that doesn't do much for me.
During the pandemic, we started this Joy project, and it was as much for ourselves as it was for our community around us. Like we needed to play for people, and we didn't care if it was one person and a dog. And we felt like people needed us, and it was true. And we made so many people cry from joy at the magic of the moment in a really difficult time. And I think, does that make us unusual? I think the people who play in string quartets are in string quartets for reasons. And I think those reasons are different. I think the Sol Quartet, do we like playing in a nice hall on nice instruments and with an audience? Yes, like that can be interesting. But if that audience claps their hands and goes home and that's it, that's actually not that interesting for us. And that's not something that we just want to drill down on. If it's the Smithsonian Museum where we promote the racist history of Angel Island and the detention of Chinese immigrants on the island, and it's sung by the U.S. military, and it feels like this sort of interesting type of reparations, that's interesting, and the audience is having an incredibly mind-altering experience of hearing the U.S. military sing in Chinese the words of Chinese detainees. So I think what drives us is different than many groups possibly, and it's driven us to the type of work that we do. And so we do like to occasionally play in nice halls and play nice concerts in pretty dresses, but we mostly like to really kind of blow people's minds with what is possible with the string quartet and what can happen.
Yeah, so kind of looking at the resonance that's happening between what you're creating through your craft and the beings that are receiving it and processing that. Yeah, is that a good way to say that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I was just imagining Charlton and Ben in pretty dresses. That's what I was doing.
I also was thinking about that. I'm like, do I want to make that joke or do I want to just move on? Okay, I hope you're as inspired as I am so far by this conversation with the Sol Quartet. In just a moment, we are about to share some behind the scenes of our podcast collaboration experience on Sounds Current, and I want to share a tip with you. If you are either currently podcasting or considering creating a podcast on behalf of your organization, business, or brand, and you're interested in leveraging the medium to make a meaningful cultural impact, I've created a free, well-curated resource for you called the Podcast Envy Exclusive. Podcast Envy Exclusive is a secret podcast feed that you can actually add directly to your current listening app that will help you think more strategically about podcasting for cultural impact rather than sifting through piles of basic podcast startup advice and marketing hype about growing your audience, selling your product or service, and monetizing your show through ads and sponsors, though those things can be nice too, I suppose. When you sign up for the Podcast Envy Exclusive for free at bit.ly/PEP exclusive, you will also be invited to share with me your top podcasting strategy questions, and I will do my best to give you my top podcasting strategy answers within the podcast. So once again, that's bit.ly/PEP exclusive, linked for you in the show notes. And at the time of this recording, for a very limited time, you will also have access to a special offer on our limited Light Up Your Mic strategy coaching services. You know, as we say on Podcast Envy, just in case you're ready for more customized, in-depth support on making your culturally impactful podcast the envy of everyone else. Shifting a little bit into talking about the podcast season that we created together, focusing around the work that you were doing with Angel Island. And of course, this is Sounds Current. That is a different type of media creation, a different type of storytelling, a different type of craft. And it's also time shifted in that it's not a live performance. You're not getting an immediate reaction or immediate feedback from an audience. And we actually haven't really had a chance to debrief since putting the season out there, taking it to the Tribeca Festival in New York. And I'm curious, and you don't have to censor it just because I produced and edited it with you, but I'm curious for you what that process has left you with. Like, have you gotten feedback? Have you heard anything? What have been the reactions, or how do you feel like that process impacted the work that you're doing at all?
I think what you had said earlier, which was Andrea was telling you about us, and it was like overload and you couldn't quite comprehend what we did. That's a common reaction. Like, wait, what do you do? And people often articulate that it's hard to understand what we do all day or all week or all year. Like, how does this all thread together? Or what is this project really about? And I think the podcast was a medium. Our hope with the podcast was that it would be a medium in which people could get more intimate with how a project is put together, what our lives are like, what are all the threads that are coming together. And sort of with the belief that the more intimate people are with the process and with the people, the more powerful these stories become and the more impact we can have. And personally, I've gotten exactly that feedback. I've had conversations with numerous people who've heard the podcast who now are, I start talking about something and they're like, oh, Andy from the podcast, or oh, the poet Jenny Lim. Oh, yeah, I heard her voice on the podcast. Or people who haven't been able to see Angel Island, but all of a sudden know about the project and understand about the history and understand about what we're doing. And it's sort of this snapshot of the complexity of all the things that we do boiled down. And it's an intimacy that people aren't often invited into, that they're hearing Charlton's voice, they're hearing the voices of our collaborators, they're hearing funny conversations between the quartet. So that to me is the ultimate success of like, now I can point, hey, oh, you want to know more about this? Like, hey, go to the podcast.
First of all, I want to say thank you for leading us through our virgin podcast experience. You were an amazing guide. Just
Thank you.
Spectacular. And to expand on what Kathryn was saying is that no matter how long a conversation we will have with somebody about the quartet, it's not going to last like several hours, that they would get if they went through the season of sounds current. And many people have gone through the season and they now have an understanding, at least of that particular project and how we operated through that particular project on a level that was unheard of. I mean, that we would never, in any conversation, we would never be able to get that deep. So it's, I think, very special.
I loved it. I thought it was really amazing. And, you know, like Andrea, you're like, and also I have to say, Kathryn, like putting together all the recording and making sure that all worked. Like, you know, Kathryn did so much work for this. And, you know, just to be able to like hear all the interviews and how much this project meant to everybody, you know, aside from the Sol Quartet. Of course, it meant a lot for the Sol Quartet. And even me as a newcomer to the quartet, like it meant a lot, this project. And just hearing from, you know, Jenny, hearing from like Angel Island descendants, and hearing from just so many people, artists, Matthew Ozawa, director of the new opera that was produced about Angel Island, talk about his history and just how much this story resonated with everybody. It was really special. It was really special. I learned so much history throughout, you know, that whole process. I learned so much about immigration in this country that I didn't know before. And then listening to the podcast too, it was really moving and touching. And yeah, I loved it.
I think an interesting thing that we haven't talked about yet is that we did the first episode and then we realized like, wait, what if we used music not just from the original oratorio by Juan Ro, but what if we actually pulled in and showcased some of our other composers? And we made a decision to focus on Asian American composers, you know, and using some existing recordings and using some recordings that we created actually for the podcast. I think that was an incredible move. And people have remarked to me also like that the music sort of made it really special. That Charlton had a great podcast host voice, and that the music really also sort of like amplified the whole experience and made it something very special and unique.
And podcast intro.
Oh yeah, and Charlton composed the podcast intro. So I think there's like this interesting weaving together that, you know, we did with you. I mean, really, we gave you a pile of way too many interviews and way too much material and said, good luck. And yeah. Andrea, you did an amazing feat of a job of whittling that down to 4 episodes.
I will say that every project I take on, definitely I get new challenges. Okay. This is no exception.
I'm like curious to hear what the process of choosing music was like for you.
So I will say that I've done like a little bit of, I guess, music supervision is what we would call it, of music supervision, where we're not working with original compositions that were composed for the podcast. You know, it's more like, here's a stock music library and there's hundreds of thousands of random things. This was the first time where the music felt like it was very important to get it right in terms of the emotional storytelling that we were doing. The way that I do music, just briefly, is as we're editing, cutting together the interviews, I hear transitions that need to be made, whether it's a transition from one aspect of the story to another aspect that don't naturally join together and they need a music bridge to connect them, or if it's a piece of the storytelling that feels important to highlight emotionally and enhance that through music. Those are kind of some of the times where I'll mark, we need something here, and I'll kind of put an emotion, like we need something with a fast tempo to move the story forward. Or I might put, I'm hearing strings in my mind here, or we'd had a lot of strings because you are a string quartet, or I'm hearing something discordant here. Like I don't want something beautiful and melodic. Like I'm hearing tension, I'm hearing discordance or something. And so then I would just go through the music selections you had sent me, and I'm just clicking through them and going like, what is the piece that pops up that has that feeling that I want? And then I put it in and see if it fits or if it doesn't. It's extremely time consuming. It's extremely fun. I love doing it. And I do think that that music that you all sent me, like it does evoke a whole new world. And it was amazing to me how different the styles were of the different composers you had sent me, but somehow they all worked together magically, even though they were very diverse.
That's Del Sol.
Well, and also the composers, because the composers made their decisions about what to send to.
Yeah.
Based on the first episode that we have put together and also the storyline that we're trying to tell. Yeah, that's cool.
So part of this series that I'm doing on the Creative Imposter right now, I'm also looking at, for podcasting for me and, my craft of storytelling through this medium and really helping other organizations and groups tell their stories through this particular format. Our industry has had a lot of ups and downs, and I'm sort of like, I don't know. To create the type of podcast we created together, it's an expensive process. And even, the budget that we had versus like when we went to the Tribeca Festival, and I was talking to some of the creators there, and we're in the same category as them, and they had budgets that were like 10 times what ours was.
Wow.
And I'm like, who in their right mind spends that much money on a podcast? Like, how are you ever going to make that money back? Even if you sell ads and have advertising revenue, I'm not sure that money gets made back. And so there's been sort of this like question in my mind of like, is it worth it? Does this medium make sense? Am I in the wrong industry? Like, what's happening here? And I'm curious if you all have, as we're looking at potential new seasons, what questions you sort of have about the podcasting process. What's on your mind about making a decision to continue forward and do more?
I guess from a financial standpoint, nothing that we do makes sense. So this is not
We're like the,
I mean, our entire industry is based on the idea of philanthropy, that there are people in the world that believe art should exist and it's not about a monetary value. Taylor Swift is a different kind of musician where it's about making money. To some degree, we can argue about that later. No, but the economic models of her touring are different.
Yeah, that's a more precise.
Maybe
statement.
that's a more precise statement.
Yeah.
This is the pushback I get. So, the arts just in general, like if we commodify the arts in that way, we get into very dangerous, I think, territory. And I think that's the misconception that a lot of people have is like, oh, I'm a creative, I support myself as a tech employee, so therefore you should be able to. I don't think that's a wise model to follow. That being said, I don't know, we were hearing some stuff about podcasting and like the style of podcasting that we're making isn't necessarily economically hugely viable. And I don't know if that's true or not. I am not a podcast expert. But for us, I think we're investing in the storytelling and we make investments in storytelling. And so in us investing in the storytelling, we're saying we're doing this work. We want to amplify it further. This is a way of inviting people in. And we could spend that money on, marketing this or pushing social media ads there or doing this kind of recording or making a podcast. But at the same point, we need to be able to connect the dots on funders, whether that's individual donors or foundations who believe that this work is important. I think for the specificity of what we're trying to do with this podcast is about connecting, in some sense, past, present, future. It's about we're part of a continuum of society, and we're really trying to renew creative possibility, create the next era of creative possibility in the Bay Area. So what does that look like? What does that mean? And it's the work that we're doing now, and it's very connected to the history and it's connected to where we're going.
Yeah, I think the podcast felt very much in line with our mission to get the arts out there, to get the word out there. And as Kathryn was saying, like most of the things that we do don't make any economic sense. It's like a recording. If we may put out a high quality recording, that's like $20,000, $30,000. We're not going to make that back. But then, it's out there and people can listen to it. We're in the arts. And, if a rich philanthropist suddenly decides that they really love the work that we're doing and want to drop us some more money, that'd be great. But otherwise, we're going to continue.
That's a plug, right?
Oh yeah. Anybody listening out there?
Please send your donations too.
But I mean, otherwise, we're going to continue to just do what we do as long as we can. I mean, it's like we have to balance things in a way that we don't go under, but otherwise, we'll do our best to keep things moving along.
We find a way.
Well, I mean, and also like, the fact that the podcast world, like the questions that you raise about like, are they going to ever make the money back, but I think that's like kind of assuming that the value of what we're offering is, if it's not monetary, then it has no value, So like, yeah, I mean, because we live in capitalism and that's how things work. But I think that more chances to have dialogues with people when, conversations and discussions are like failing all over the world. I think, even though we can have it in like a very small way, I think those opportunities are useful and they're vital, especially right now, and I think that all four of us, we really believe in the work that we're doing, and to bring people into the dialogue, I think that's worth it.
Yeah, the whole balance sheet thing is, when we look at the short term, it really obviously is not a rosy picture for almost anything that we do. I mean, including you and the we probably. Does anyone know when the word content started being used?
Oh, God.
Like in the way that we use right now.
I sometimes refer to it as the C word.
Yeah, because I mean, for instance, I know that like Charles Dickens didn't create content, right?
Yeah.
Like he wrote books, right? And
Was it like, I feel like it was like starting in like 2010 or something?
But there's a big shift
social media?
with the idea of content.
I think YouTube gets blamed a lot for this. Like the original content creators were YouTube creators.
Oh,
I
okay.
think.
That makes sense.
But whatever it is not sellable in the same way as, say, a book was or a record was. I mean, even when we compare ourselves to Taylor Swift, obviously there's a lot, more going on in the revenue world of Taylor Swift. But her world is awfully different from Michael Jackson's, too. When, there was this 12-inch thing that people bought in Asia and Africa and the US, and it, cost about $8, and everyone wanted this, and it was a real thing. And, that something shifted when we weren't looking, or maybe we were looking, but there was nothing that we could do about it. So, everyone's needing to reinvent that. And it's not, deciding whether it's a good thing or a bad thing isn't particularly helpful. It's just about finding new ways to exist and still do what we want to do.
I'm curious if, on a very high level, the experience of having the podcast as an official selection at Tribeca Festival, being one of 16 total, but 8 nonfiction and 4 independent, quote, nonfiction projects out of hundreds of submissions that went to that festival. What did that feel like to you all? Because I know that is a festival more closely connected to my craft and my industry, but what are your takeaways from those laurels or that honor, if anything?
Oh no, I think it's awesome to get an award from an adjacent art field, because it feels like it helps magnify and turn our work a little bit more multidimensional, and that recognition, I think, is a great honor. I mean, I was the one that went to Tribeca, and it was fascinating for me to meet all these like mostly film people. And I met some film composers who were really sweet, and they were just in this other world. But they were very, I would say, probably envious. It's like they wanted to make more art music, but they had these deadlines and they had, all these projects. And so it was hard for them to do that. I ran into a lot of people who were like, it's like, oh, so what film are you on? It's like, no, we made a podcast.
We made a podcast about a string quartet.
I quickly shifted. Yeah, I was like, at a certain point in the festival, like day 2, I stopped saying podcast and I started saying audio documentary.
Oh, you should have told me that. I kept on saying podcast.
Because podcast, they were like, huh? What? What? And then as soon as you said audio documentary, that like put it into the filmmaker world.
Smart. Okay, I'm going to start using that.
I mean, it was definitely like, this is amazing. And we're like, what does this mean? Because it's just so out of our normal sphere, which is awesome, totally awesome. But also like the types of decision making of like, should we hire a publicist or should we send somebody? Or, it was like harder to know how to make those decisions just because, Ben kept saying, he's like, so the podcast was PR for the quartet. So are we going to hire PR to PR the PR for the quartet? Like,
I mean, it is a little bit never ending. It's
right.
Like, wait, how far down the rabbit hole does this go?
Well, when we spoke to some of our PR people that we've worked with in the past, they were like, That's great. I'm not quite sure how I would pitch this.
I mean, at the end of the day, we get to tell people we have a Tribeca selection, and people think that's cool. And we have Tribeca hats, I mean,
and also the listeners, because I think just to get those laurels, it did mean that we were on, like listings, and we were on people's minds, and we got more listeners because of that.
Yeah, we did.
So that's great.
I'm starting to run into people at our concerts who have actually heard the podcast first before hearing us.
Oh, really?
Like, coming to hear us for the first time, but they had heard the podcast first.
Tell us that.
Yeah.
You should share these things. That's great.
How many times do you all see each other per week?
No, I know, exactly.
Not enough to get all this kind of information out.
Great.
So before we close, I just want to open it up and say, is there anything that you feel is important to share, or any thing that's coming to your mind that you didn't get a chance to say?
I keep on thinking about the question before, we sort of changed to talking about the podcast. And something that I was thinking about is I'm not sure we're all that different from other musicians in our basic, why we're doing what we do, what drives us, what got us interested. But what we end up doing is really different. And I think it may be about sort of just getting rid of assumptions about how it's going to be done, getting rid of things that block us. Because I know a lot of people who play the violin a lot better than I do and have a lot less fun doing it. And I think we all, if after you go off stage, at Davies Symphony Hall or something, and it's like, I played really well, I feel kind of frustrated, what's for dinner? And I think we always look for a way together that, how can we feel that this was more meaningful? How can we feel that this was more worthwhile? And rethinking that, what is it that's that blockage between achieving what we were all talking about? That feeling of having connected, having permitted people to have a new experience. And it could be totally different for, different performers, for different audience. But I think that's what feels different, is that we're agile enough to try and solve these things, try and create new possibilities.
But I think we're always talking about it too. I mean, we're always searching, we're always questioning. And I think that process is, I think, a huge difference. I would guess, because if everybody were doing that, they wouldn't all be doing what they're doing.
But my symphony friends talk a lot, but it's like the conductor was bad, or we aren't getting paid enough, or there's no parking. There's all sorts of reasons.
No, the symphony thing is a total different ballgame.
We're not going to get into
Yeah, we're not going to. No. But I'm just talking about even
That's
other.
a different podcast.
Even other quartets. It's like, for example, if you are mainly playing museum pieces.
Museum pieces?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like
older things.
dead pieces.
Dead people.
Great pieces, which is like why they're in the museum. But the beauty of music is that you can take a museum piece and you can share it now, right? But at the same time, if we're going to have a legacy that continues, a spectrum of music development that continues on into the future, we have to be playing the pieces that are being written now. If we're only playing old museum pieces, then that continuum gets lost.
But to backtrack just like a moment, you said we talk about it, and Ben was talking about, there's a reflection process that happens. When something doesn't work 100%, we reflect on that and we say, how do we do that better? And we're open to change and we're open to shift. So we played Ben's block party because we thought it would be fun. And it was fun, but it was almost 100 degrees. And my bow actually split.
Backup bow.
My backup bow, and not my nice bow, but it split, right? And I was like, that was a lot of fun. Let's do that again. But maybe if it's 98 degrees, maybe we should consider postponing, or, But there's a reflection process and an openness that takes us, I feel like at the pandemic, we asked a lot of really interesting and hard questions, and we allowed ourselves to push through, and that we took some turn that we haven't, we took some exit off the highway and we haven't gone back. And it's just, we're going down this road where someone's like, you should do a podcast. And we were like, yeah, let's do that. And we had no idea what we were getting into. And Hyeyung was like, I'll lead the charge. And I'm like, awesome. And without her, I don't think we could have done it. No, seriously. And then we just kept doing these interviews and we're like, wow, that was a lot of time. Like, I didn't know this was going to take so much time, and it was easy work in some ways of, having conversations and stuff that we're really passionate about. But it was, I had to bring a whole extra suitcase to New York full of podcast equipment. And like, we had to, we all had to learn a lot of things about how to make this all happen. But we sort of said yes to a creative inspiration. We stayed open. And most normal. I think many people reflect back and sort of make little changes or very small changes. And we sometimes literally jump on new boats, and so Ben says, hey, let's go on a river and play music, 5-day whitewater rafting trip. And we're like, yeah, sure. And when Hyeyung came on board, she's like, yeah, this sounds great. And then we, found out that, swimming wasn't always the biggest highlight of her life. Right. No, but it's like, but your openness to saying yes into that new opportunity. And it's one of the most magical, special moments of our season. And possibly the theme of the second season of the podcast.
Well, a side note about the whole big production company podcast thing. I feel like, those huge production companies, they're so big. It's like if they're doing movies and then putting a couple $100 million into something, putting a couple 100,000 on a podcast, it's just like
nothing,
chump change.
right?
Yeah. It's a whole different scale for sure.
But the power of an important, beautiful story done by people who really care about their work, the quintet of who's in this room right now and on the computer, and then all the other people and all of the people who really gave so much time to make this all happen.
Edwin
and Alex and Lisa and all the people.
It's a lot
of people. And that's sort of been the legacy of the Angel Island Project was, people showed up and said, this is important. And that's the gift that has kept on giving for us. So we carry that with us.
So here's to working together as artists, as creators, as people who care deeply about the future of our society. Let's commit to putting ourselves in the spaces between the binary, to pushing our craft forward, to telling the stories and uplifting the voices that deserve to be heard in new ways by new audiences, no matter how outside our comfort zone that may be at times. It's a privilege and a gift to do so. Meanwhile, I encourage you to check out Sounds Current in your favorite podcast app and learn more about the Del Sol Quartet at delsolquartet.com. And if you are podcasting or dreaming of podcasting, please connect with me at thecreativeimposter.com so that we can learn how we may be able to support each other in the new year. All of the links, of course, are in the show notes for you in the episode description in your app. The Creative Imposter is produced, hosted, and edited by me, Andrea Klunder, with technical support from Edwin R. Ruiz. Our theme music is by Jovia Armstrong. I thank you so much for listening, and this week, I encourage you to consider new ways to build connection and say yes to creative inspiration wherever that may carry you.